So what he has mentioned is that
How
uh,
one can get over the
yeah,
rigors of 46A? I think something to
yeah,
that
yeah,
effect.
yeah, yeah, yeah. He has said that if possible, please ask the discussion leader to throw light on the how the fetters prescribed in Rule 46A can be overcome. He has also mentioned there are certain situations where it could be pleaded that whatever appellant is putting forth is nothing but elaboration of factual position already brought in on record during the assessment proceedings.
Yes, we will there is a direct case law on this, so we'll take that up. But as far as the first aspect is concerned, I thought I'll put up before the learning audience a slightly rephrased questions. You know, uh, let us look into and understand the reasons why 46A has to be taken recourse to by the assessee. So why do gaps remain in the evidence at the first hearing stage? That is when the assessing officer actually takes up the hearing, and at that point of time, response is given to that hearing. Why do gaps arise? Because of which later on additional evidence has to be produced. So if we can look at those reasons, maybe therein will lie the solution as to how to ensure that we don't have to face 46A and overcome the rigors of it. So I think with this, I will begin. First, let us look at document number one, which is the comparative analysis of Rule 46A. This is compiled by DC Agarwal Advocate. Now, basically, what I want to read out is the ingredients of Rule 46A. So, yeah, if you can refer to that section, the ingredients of Rule 46A, or you can directly take it from 46A also, whichever way. The appellant shall not be entitled to produce. So actually, it starts in a negative manner. What appellant cannot do. That's how. It is not a section which states something in a positive manner. It states that the appellant shall not be entitled to produce before the deputy commissioner appeals, or as the case may be, the commissioner appeals. Now, of course, the commissioner appeals only any evidence, whether oral or documentary, other than the evidence produced by him during the course of proceedings before the assessing officer, except in the following circumstances. So, what is the normal course of action for an appellant who is aggrieved by the order passed by the assessing officer? He can produce or adduce evidence. That evidence should be such, whether it's oral or documentary evidence, it should be such as has already been produced by him before the assessing officer in the course of proceedings. So it may not necessarily be before the assessing officer. It could be even written submissions. It doesn't use, the section doesn't use the word before the assessing officer. So I'll not use them. It says produced by him during the course of proceedings before the assessing officer, except in the following circumstances. So what are those four exceptions? A, B, C, D. The first is where the assessing officer has refused to admit evidence which ought to have been admitted. So any evidence which the assessing officer has refused to admit. So let us look at situations where such a thing has happened or such a thing happens. In the extreme situation, especially towards the close of the assessment, sometimes the assessing officer refuses to accept some written submissions or a letter which we prepare, compile, and take it at the time of hearing. In such case, what one has to do is a different story. But yes, situation happens. You try to send it by RPAD, because even in the tapal they will not accept it. We ask them to write refused on it and give it back. That is the kind of evidence which can be laid under 46A, permissible. The second one is where the appellant was prevented by sufficient cause from producing the evidence which he was called upon to produce by the assessing officer. Now, example of this could be non-availability of a document. Imagine that particular assessing officer has asked for certain details. Now, that paper or document may have been seized by the department itself in some other matter or in the same matter or by some other department. For example, the sales tax VAT people may have seized that document, but for whatever reason, that document may not be available at that point of time. See, there is also another situation, but that gets covered in C, where a document arises for the first time after the assessment is complete. Can you contemplate or think of anything like this? Last time I had taken that example of one case of mine where actually what had happened was that a transaction had taken place somewhere, and in that that assessee's PAN number was reported by the sub registrar of documents, that is, that sub registrar of assurance. Now, at that time, that person was not a client of mine, and assessment was framed, and a huge demand was raised. So when I came into the picture for the appeal, uh, as advised by me, they applied under RTI to the, or rather, the RTI application was already made, but it takes 1 month, 2 months, etc. So by the time the hearing assessment order got completed, so they got the RTI document giving extract of all the documents which were registered within 1 month of that particular month, say it was the month of October of that year. So when it was gone through, it was found that the assessee's name nowhere appeared. There was no that particular agreement which was, and that particular transaction was which was reported under assessee's PAN was very much there, but the name of the parties was different. This was an evidence which we produced before the CIT appeal, and rightly so, he held that yes, this is a fresh evidence, and he was ready to admit it since it was not available. The document itself was not available before. It has directly come from sub registrar's office. So he sent it to the assessing officer and asked for a remand report. The third clause which we look at was there the appellant was prevented by sufficient cause from producing evidence before the assessing, before the officer, any evidence which is relevant to any ground of appeal. This ground of appeal which we had taken was that such a transaction did not exist in the name of the assessor. Now, this, because of the absence of RTI reply to the query, was not a ground which was taken up before the assessing officer specifically. So it is a fresh ground which has come, and this evidence pertains to that ground, and therefore it needs to be understood that that is what will be covered under C. Of course, there are many other situations which could get covered under C. Now, finally, D, where the assessing officer has made the order appealed against without giving sufficient opportunity to the appellant to adduce evidence relevant to any ground of appeal. What is sufficient? Rather, wait a minute. Let it go. Sufficient opportunity. So I did one quick search last time. Last time I actually somehow did not share that. I searched the Income Tax Act as well as the rules, and I found that the word sufficient comes in 47 places, and essentially relating to appeals, it comes in 10 places. That is starting from 249. It goes 3, it goes to 253, 5, 256, 1. So these are all sufficient grounds for either not presenting the appeal in time, etc. So mainly it's relating to not being able to produce evidence within a certain time. Now you will appreciate that this last case arises because of pressures of time barring. But often this time barring pressures, that is what I experienced last time. Even in fact, just now on 30th April, we experienced the same thing. There was a video conferencing which we had asked for, video hearing. It's a slight diversion, but let me cover it. In two cases. So in both cases, we got the date. But that date was already when the lockdown had started. So we wrote to them saying that the infrastructure required for the video conferencing is currently not available, and certain documents which we wish to produce are also not available as the lockdown conditions are prevalent, and neither the assessee can make that arrangement, nor we are in a position to make the arrangement as authorized representative. So they said we cannot accede to your request since the assessment is time barring on 30th. So we give you one more opportunity to furnish any written evidence by way of uploading your submission. So we uploaded the submissions on 26th of April, and then this suddenly there was this administrative relaxation. So now the time barring is on 30th June. So after that, we have only received a intimation saying that your request for postponement or adjournment of video conferencing has been accepted. No date has been provided. So this is just for your information. What happens is Many a times, assessing officer for own compulsions of completing the assessment within a certain time frame is not able to give sufficient opportunity. Now, here one must also realize that the initial 142, 143.1 or 142 notice comes generally moment a case is selected for scrutiny. So at that time, it is very important to reply to that notice. So once we reply to that notice saying that, please tell us what exactly are the details and information which you require. Then after that, the department falls silent right until the assessment becomes active, which is about 2 to 3 months before completion of the assessment. So in such case, one can always successfully argue that sufficient time was not given, because these same things were known when you selected the case for scrutiny. So you could have asked for the details then and there, but those are not provided. So this fourth clause becomes something which one can successfully argue for. Now, having seen these four clauses, what is sub clause 2 and sub clause 3? That is, having considered ABCD, sub clause 2 says no evidence shall be admitted under sub rule 1 unless it's just there. No need to scroll down. No evidence shall be admitted under sub rule 1 unless the deputy commissioner appeals or the CIT appeals, as the case may be, records in writing the reasons for its admission. So first requirement is that he has to record in writing the reason for such admission. The second part, which is covered in subclause 3, the deputy commissioner appeals, or as the case may be, commissioner appeals, uh, shall not take into account any evidence produced under sub rule 1 unless the assessing officer has been allowed a reasonable opportunity to examine the evidence or document, or to cross examine the witness produced by the appellant, or to produce any evidence or document or any witness in rebuttal of the additional evidence produced by the appellant. So basically, this A and B, uh, no specific, I mean, it is not necessary, as long as if a remand report is called for. There are judgments which we have seen last time. It says that if you have called for a remand report, that is considered as sufficient compliance to subclause 3. So it is not necessary that pointedly the CIT appeals has to say that please examine this evidence, and if you wish to cross-examine any witness, or if you wish to produce any additional evidence, please produce. So no, they only say, we have sent this back, these are the submissions made, and this is the additional evidence produced. So kindly send your remand report. Something to that effect, I think, is the internal letter, which we never get to see because it never comes to the assessee as a copy. But the assessing officer generally sends a notice after that, calling for certain details. So basically, this step is very critical, because if this step is not taken, two aspects. One is that reasons for accepting the additional evidence have to be recorded. The second thing is that a remand report has to be obtained. Only then can the additional evidence be considered. There is a subclause 4, the last one, after which we can open for
हो तो
discussion.
झुकला दरवाजा बंद
But
केला
subclause 4 says nothing contained in this rule shall affect the power of the deputy commissioner appeals, or as the case may be, the commissioner appeals, to direct the production of any document or examination of any witness to enable him to dispose of the appeal, or for any substantial cause, including the enhancement of the assessment or penalty, whether on his own motion or on the request of the assessing officer, under clause A of subsection 1, section 251, or the imposition of penalty under section 271. Basically, if you look at it, subclause 4 is what is the powers of the commissioner, the inherent powers as also expressed, and therefore we have that comparison which is made. So we have a particular textual document which we referred to last time, which was the comparison between the two, namely rule 46A, this sub rule 4, and section 250 into bracket 4. So whether those powers of the CIT appeal to admit evidence are hindered or restricted by 46A. So we have judgments which we are going to go through the tribunal, which say that no, this sub rule does not fetter the powers of the CIT appeals, which are considered to be coterminous with that of the assessing officer. In short, he can supposedly step into the shoes of the assessing officer, so to say. However, it is always advisable, according to me, that any fresh evidence which is produced is always referred to the assessing officer, because generally, irrespective of what remand report the assessing officer gives, ultimately it's the CIT appeals who applies his mind and gives his decision. Because the remand report is not binding on the CIT appeals, it's just something additional which has to be considered. But it is always better to uh, see or ensure that something like this happens. Also, one more point which I want to, which we discussed last time, was that merely because a notice of the hearing is sent by the CIT appeals office to the income tax officer, that is not considered as sufficient compliance to subclause 3. Please note. So, therefore, unless a proper remand report is obtained and a proper communication is made enclosing the evidence, which has been additional evidence which has been furnished by the appellant, uh, it would not be considered as sufficient compliance to subclause 3, and in such a case, the case may go against the assessee. So it's important to note this. Having seen this, we'll just quickly go back to a small recap. Um, Now let us look at what practical aspects we saw last time, and then I think we can go to that document, which is the comparative analysis, and that will close our summary. So we can open the discussion. So practical aspects is understanding nature of the evidence. This is what we discussed last time. Required to be produced by the assessee or by the appellant. Assessee before the assessing officer, appellant before the appellate authority. So we had taken that example of uh, use of land for agriculture, because see, if we take an example, it is always easy to understand. So instead of telling you theoretically what kind of evidence is possible, that it is documentary evidence, oral evidence, it is third party evidence, it could be some kind of a voucher, or it could be entries in the books of accounts, or it could be contemporaneous record, or it could be circumstantial evidence, or it could be a statement made by a third party, or it could be entry or some kind of document belonging to a third entity. But rather than hypothetically thinking, let us take an example. So if you want to show that a particular land is being used for agriculture, what could be provided? The first thing which could be provided is, if you are in state of Maharashtra, 7 by 12 extract, or if in any other state, whatever the document is called, the document which evidences that the land belongs to you or that you are cultivating it, and it also mentions generally what kind of cultivation is there. Similarly, it could be the Talati's certificate. It could be the receipts for payment of agricultural tax. It could also be photographic evidence or satellite images. In fact, department has made good use of it to refute the assessee's claim that the land was being used for agriculture. It could be affidavit by neighbors or respectable persons in the locality. It could be evidence of sales bills of produce which has been produced. It could be wages or receipts of workers when wages are paid to them. It could be mandi bills or receipts. It could be soil report, or maybe the local Krishi Vikas Kendra or Krishi Vignan Kendra has done some experiment, or their officials have visited you and they have taken samples from the land, or they have given you seeds to plant. That could also be an evidence. Or there could be a survey because of a famine or because of some such thing. Government keeps doing the surveys of estimated loss of crop, or what is the estimated cropping which has happened this time. So National Statistical Survey, they do some survey. So you have got receipt pertaining to that. So all these uh, are something which is considered as in the form of an evidence. Out of all these, what could be clinching? If you yourself or a relative of yours makes an affidavit, that could be considered as self-serving, because what happens is that the assessee or the assessee's relative will normally be prompted to say something which is favoring himself. So that could be a weak evidence in the eyes of the appellate authority, or even in the eyes of the assessing officer. So what makes the evidence clinching or strong? So anything which puts the matter beyond doubt. So it should be contemporaneous, it should not be self-serving, it should be capable of reconfirmation or replication. For example, if it is an sale bill for mandi, then yes, assessing officer can send the inspector, or he can call for the record or issue summons under 131 and get the confirmation from that mandi that yes, they have actually purchased this material from this particular person who is the farmer, his name, address, whatever, some details would be there. So an independent verification of that evidence is possible. So this is the kind of evidence. So now I come to those four aspects which we discussed actually today. I mean, not four aspects, that point which I discussed. In my mind, I have four aspects about it, or four possible reasons why this there could be gaps or a shortfall in the production of evidence. See, I mean, Sathe sir would probably guide me in this. I am making my own attempt for the first time for something like this because I have not read this in a book anywhere. See, the first thing is that assessee, and to a great extent, the tax representative or the authorized representative, is so familiar with the case of the assessee, extremely familiar. Means, see, if it is an old assessee of yours, old client of yours, then you are aware of his business to a great extent. And assessee himself is aware of the business to a great extent. So what he writes or what kind of evidence he gives, he thinks that it is obvious. What is there to explain in it? I mean, yes, it is agricultural land. वो पता है हमको, हम actually agriculture कर रहे हैं. अरे, that is not what is sufficient. And so this is the first outlook, according to me, this outlook that it's everything is evidence. I'm true. I'm right. It is not a false claim. Brings you into a sense of complacency, and therefore, what happens is you fail to uh, produce evidence which is cogent and which, at a later stage, once the assessing officer, uh, you know, finds holes in your evidence or rejects your evidence and makes an addition, then one starts thinking and brings in a lot of evidence on paper, which actually should have been brought originally only. So, and which was very much in the possession of the assessee. So that is a situation which becomes complicated because department may try to say that this is you're producing something, afterwards it is not produced, so they may resist. So the first thing is this approach that what I have stated is correct and there is no need for me to um, elaborate it further. Second flaw or the second difficulty which can happen is that extent to which and what is the direction in which the assessing officer is going is often misread. See, from the various questions, uh, I mean, generally our syllabus or whatever, I mean, I won't blame the syllabus because we are just, basically the idea of the syllabus to have us an outline. What we learn is we learn in the actual ropes when we actually do our articleship and later on when we start doing our practice. So we should be able to read the mind of the assessing officer by now. That what is he driving at from the kind of questions which is asking, or from the interaction, one should be able to understand what he is trying to do, what is his target. Now, if that is known or that can be well read by the assessee and the representative, of course, when I say assessee, it's actually both of them, then appropriate evidence to block it would very well be produced. Because it may be some casual remark. I remember always, अरे हाउसहोल्ड बहुत कम लग रहा है कैश विड्रॉल्स और इतने में इतना कैसे घर चलेगा. Moment you say him making that casual remark, although he has not put a query on the order sheet, you have to immediately find out what is the total number of family members who all stays together, what are their PAN numbers, what is their contribution for household expenses in their individual returns, what are such expenses which have gone by check, like society charges, this, that, etc., and try to arrive at a proper, reasonably good figure, which then would be acceptable and palatable. Prepare that and keep it because this is what it is going to drive to. So you should be aware of the casual remarks are very significant. But now, of course, it's going to be faceless. So let us hear from the experts what that would imply. But therefore, this is the second point, according to me, that often we misread what the AO has in his mind or what basically he is arriving at. The third problem is that we consider ourselves when we are the same person, when he is doing the assessment, his approach is he wants to complete the reply quickly and he's not going into great detail. See, the kind of answer to a assessing officer's notice I will write is not the same as a submission which I will make for the CIT appeals. What I'm doing there is I'm making a paper book. I go through the whole thing thoroughly. I look at case laws. I look at all the implications. Now, can we not do something similar at the assessing officer stage? I understand. In fact, my point of view is this, that when I am compiling and filing a return, I should see, okay, what aspects of this return can lead to controversy. When I will go even up to that stage. So, the really speaking, the gap in the evidence starts when you file the income tax return, according to me. I at least have tried now in subsequent years to use that approach. That in fact, there is a very interesting thing which has come up. I think uh, we have advantage of Anil sir, so I won't deny that to our audience. Sir, the human possibilities असा एक Supreme Court judgment है ना Anil sir. Hello.
Human probabilities is what was
Yes, human probabilities, correct.
human
So,
probabilities.
yes, so that human probabilities one has to think of when one files the return. तुम्ही elaborate करा दे
Yeah.
मात्र sir. And then I'll complete my fourth point and then hand it to you for that human probabilities, because I found that concept very interesting. See, the fourth thing is there is this viewpoint of the assessees, many a times, and in fact, it is a very strong viewpoint, and one must learn with experience to counter it or master it. They think that, look, we have given you all the details and we have given you the submission. So now don't bother us. म्हणजे आम्हाला ते काय विचारत बसू नका, तुम्ही काय ते करून टाका. I mean, if you are again going to ask us everything and you are again going to grill us, then why have you appointed you? So you manage it on your own. असं एक चौथी गोष्ट मला नोटीस झालेली ओव्हर द इयर्स इन प्रॅक्टिस. नॉट ऑल असेसीज, बट सम असेसीज ऑफन थिंक ऑफ इट दैट वे कि अरे इतना सब अभी रिटर्न फाइल किया, आपको केस दे दिया, अभी ये सब क्या और प्रोड्यूस करने का, इतना सब प्रोड्यूस करेंगे तो कोई भी कर सकता है केस, दैट काइंड ऑफ अ थिंग और एन एटीट्यूड. बट यस, दैट इज द की टू इट. As much evidence as you can produce at the initial stage itself makes it beyond a shadow of doubt. But well, so insufficient production of evidence or insufficient application of mind at the assessing assessment stage. These, according to me, are four possible reasons why this gap arises. Means intended, appropriate, perfectly suitable evidence does not get filed. So one is I throw it open. Anyone has any other thoughts about this? And of course, for the human, what was it? Human possibilities. That I'll ask Anil sir to elaborate.
May I come in here for before sir, so that I would like to make one submission.
Yes, sir.
Sir,
Prasad, firstly,
Yeah.
your name, and if possible, if you can have your video also
Sure.
and your name also.
Sure, sir. Sure. This is Prasad Kshirsagar. In the faceless era, I have actually written something in my chats. But in the faceless era, it's sometimes just not only faceless, but probably the brainless, I can say. For example, I'm having an experience of a bank which has submitted its returns, which is there in doing a business for about more than 50 years, having a very proper track record of all the assessments being done very seamlessly. As expenses such as the Reserve Bank charges or the Reserve Bank expenses seem to have been disallowed by the assessing officer, and he has just given the 4 to 5 days notice in the faceless era. The explanations which we gave were not acceptable, and all straight away a 10% or 20% addition has been made. I sometimes feel that the kind of knowledge with which the assessing officers are applying to a particular case, probably this particular gentleman, I think, might not have ever assessed uh, a particular entity such as a banking one, and that is why this kind of an erroneous orders are being seen. So my humble submission is that how will we be able to deal this in this faceless era where we don't have any approach to argue the case before the first level, that is assessing officer.
Well, I'll give my one small thought before others pitch in. My thought is this, that we should try and see that whatever is the evidence which is called for from us is called for at an early stage, so that this 3-4 days pressure does not arise. And one way it could be done is that when we are preparing and compiling the return until such a scrutiny notice comes, there is an intervening time period. Let us ourselves become bad assessing officers and ask the assessee to furnish us information which will keep on our record, or which will keep as compilations. Okay, supporting evidence for each of these expenses, or an explanatory note for each of the expenses. And supporting evidence, of course, will have to be produced only when it is called for. But I'll give you my own example. There was commission paid. This was the case of a cinema theater. And as you're aware, this distributor's commission is paid, not just paid, it gets directly deducted from the money which comes in from UTO. When the telecast, because now it's actually a beamed satellite telecast, which happens in cinema theaters also. So they make the collections and they deduct it and pay it. So what we were asked for is a bill of each and every item. The total was some 1.5 crores. So 1.5 crores consisting of small daily amounts, because daily the movie is shown and you get a distributor's commission bill. So we had to produce that voluminous evidence of some 500 bills, and then they wanted a chart made in Excel of the name of the party, the telephone number, the email ID, and so on. We submitted that, and in 10 cases out of those 500, email IDs were missing. So we got a notice saying that you have not given all email IDs, and so we proposed to add the entire amount. Then we found out those 5 also and submitted them. And now, of course, because of this lockdown, everything is gone into a pause or into a hold. But that is the kind of things which probably sometimes they seem to be asking. So I mean, all the vouchers pertaining to a particular item which run into 5 and 600, and they want it. In fact, uploading it becomes a challenge. I had to upload it, breaking it up into 10 parts, because each time you can't upload more than 5 MB. So each time you have to make a partial response, upload something which is less than 5 whatever MB, then again do that, and keep on doing it 10 times. So that's my experience. But we will always find a way. See, it's this way. It's just a matter of who gets on top more quickly. A cricketer can't complain that the pitch is sticky or that the ball is too fast, or there is dew in the morning and the ball is swinging. We can't do that. We have to learn to play. Yes, sir. Sathe, sir. Bola.
Yeah. Anyway, I wanted to refrain from speaking, because this, as Sagar has always been saying, is more of an interaction. But still, I'll share 2 or 3 experiences and also try and explain what we follow in our office on a regular basis. Number one, as Kanere sir has rightly said, is that we tend to get very, very familiar with the case. And therefore, often we suggest or we say that this is obvious to us. So this is an obvious thing and therefore need not be elucidated or elaborated upon. That necessarily is not the scenario, because the assessing officer is looking at it afresh. It often happens when, of course, today even the tribunal is virtual. When we used to argue before the tribunal and we used to say X and Y, some members are very quick, some members are slow. So they used to say, Mr. Sathe, please be a little slow. We have not read the file. So that is something we need to understand. Number 2, a very important point Mr. Kanere sir said also, is in regard to the fact of reading the mind of the assessing officer. And it is true that today it's not possible to read that mind on account of the fact that the assessment is faceless. But follow this, because normally in a very large case, the submissions will be at least 2, if not 3. Normally in very large cases, there will be 3 submissions. Before the faceless scenario, what we used to say is, having responded to a notice under 142(1), if we found that the replies that we were giving are rather cryptic or in a summarized form. We used to say that we have given this submission. At the close of the first submission, we used to say that we have given this submission based on our understanding of your requirement. If, however, you feel that this is inadequate for your appreciation of the evidence, please let us know and we shall immediately respond. This we used to say at the close of the first part of it. The second part of it, we used to, when the second submission, we used to begin by saying that in our earlier submission, we did this very briefly. But in case in that submission as well as this submission, we find you have found that certain thing is lacking or you require something further, please let us know. It's not necessary that the AO will necessarily always read this. This will enable you to produce evidence at a later point of time, and the assessing these commissioner appeals then cannot say that why did you not give it at the first point. When you continuously hammer the AO and say that, look, I have given this, according to me it is sufficient, but do you want something more? Now, when you ask for something more and the AO does not respond, which normally he will not, you will be entitled to, ask for that additional evidence to be admitted at a later stage. That is the second part. Third part is, this is something which I have seen in my experience by a lot of assessees do, is that if out of the evidence available, only 60% is available, many of my colleague professionals also say, what we'll do is, wo ye sab saath mein karke lao. What happens is that because of that 40% gap, you don't put 60% on the record. Put that 60-70. Of course, if it's 20% available, then I would not suggest that you do it. But even if it's 60-70%, put it on record and say that the balance 40% I have not been able to compile because of XYZ reasons. Give me an opportunity to do so. Remember, at every stage of an assessment, if you are showing that you are putting a foot forward, then either at the first appeal stage, the second appeal stage, or even the High Court, you will be able to establish that I have tried everything. Now, if I have tried everything and something has still not come forth, when he was talking of human effort, to what extent I can be expected to do something, is something which is, of course, Kanare sir was looking at a different probability, which also I'll come to. But the point is that, for example, section 68, confirmations, you have given confirmations and out of 7 cases, 4 cases you have given bank statements also, 3 are not available. So you can then point out that these 3 people are not known to me, XYZ reasons, and therefore I'm not being able to give it. I'm attempting, I have written to the person, this is the evidence of having tried. Like in his case, he said, I've made an RTI application, the response did not come. So for example, if you have written to the bank to say that please submit to me these statements, attach a copy of what you have written, either if possible an acknowledged copy, so that your efforts come forth. That, to my mind, when you talk of sufficiency, just to make a bland statement before an appellate authority that the opportunity was sufficient may not stand you in good stead. Establish that it was not sufficient for these reasons, and that's important. And always remember one very thing, you are arguing the case of an assessee. So we as a practice never say that we are busy in time barring. No, because ultimately it is the assessee who you are representing. The assessing officer is entitled to say you ask for another representative if he is too busy. So never come on record saying that I am tied up. You may be genuinely tied up, but don't bring that on record because it is counterproductive many a times. So we say that, okay, lockdown position, very true. We say that the assessor's office, for example, we come to a case where the due date of return has come as also an assessment is going on. We say that the assessee's office is burdened with other compliance. That, yes, because ultimately under the Income Tax Act, there may be 3 or 4 compliances required. So therefore, that is probable, but never say that I don't have time. That's not on. That should never to be said. Then the principle of human probability, and that came from the case of Nurjan. So it was in the context of 68. They said that what happened was that income was, there was an entry shown in her name, and they said that no, if it is not added in the hands of the recipient, it should be added in Nurjan's hands. There the Supreme Court said that look at that uneducated lady who is not in a position to earn anything. You simply cannot add something as income in her hands, because it is against the principle of human probability that she will be in a position to earn that income also. Also, this human probability thing is something, when I say that we use the term in legal phraseology, that something which shocks conscience, that this is simply not possible. And it has been recorded in some of my orders which have gone against me. I have succeeded in appeal on a different footing. That's a different matter. But for example, take a case that many of your clients have got cash balance in the books. Cash balance of 5 lakh rupees is in the books, and yet they withdraw 50,000 rupees from the bank to make an expenditure. Now that is against the grain of human probability. There may be scenarios where it is difficult for you to explain. Then agar books mein 5 lakh rupees balance hai, then why is the person withdrawing 50,000? That is something which becomes more difficult to explain. We ultimately stand on a legal footing to say that this is part of my cash balance. You cannot say that I cannot keep the cash balance because that is my right. We succeed, not that we don't succeed, but at times if an officer writes, and in my cases they have written that this is just not possible that you withdraw 50,000 rupees when you have 5 lakh rupees in cash balance on hand. Also the fact that, again, doctrine of human probability, that you say when we talk of 68 especially, in the case of relatives or friends, you have to establish that yes, the credit or the burden of proof is far greater in the hands of in regard to relatives, because uh, judicial authorities always say that all right, you produce the bank statement of that person. You can't say that I don't know the bank statement of my wife, I don't have the bank statement of my brother. It is not going to be believed in Indian context. So therefore, we were, in fact, I will give an illustration and then close and leave the floor open, is in the context not of a tax matter, but in the tax of FEMA. Now, FEMA is depending not only on stay of a person, but intention. And we were arguing a case that he intended to start a business, etc. He had traveled on a tourist visa and then converted into business visa, etc., etc. I'm talking of a case of FEMA, which ultimately went to ED. And the authorities have recorded that this gentleman has gone abroad, newly married, 6 months into marriage, but his wife has not joined him. Now, if one intends to take up permanent employment abroad, in the Indian context, it is normal for the wife to join the husband at a later point of time. That itself went against the grain of our being to establish the intent to stay abroad. So when you talk of, human probability, before you put forth a particular argument to the officer, just think as to whether you would believe this or not. And if you don't, often in my office, before we go in for a response to a summons, it has happened in my career at least 10-15 times, we actually grill the witness as if the officer is asking, and that we call a mock examination. Because it's very easy to say that my wife manages everything, she's a partner in XYZ. You ask for ask 10 questions. And we always tell our clients that you are saying that no, there is no problem. She's actually into working, and that is why the salary of 3 lakhs to her is justified. I always tell my clients that I will ask only 10 questions. And if on those 10 questions your wife answers everything correctly, she can meet any officer, not a problem. But it doesn't happen, because for a fact we know that she's actually not working. So all these things are very, very important. And interestingly, Kanere sir said about sufficient. There is and why I'm saying this is that there is a distinction in law between, I think I mentioned it the last occasion also, between reasonable. The law uses, or the rules use the word sufficient and not reasonable. So whether in the context of not providing the evidence, whether the difficulty was sufficient. Now, sufficiency is a far stronger test than reasonableness. And if you see 269 ST for the first or second time in the penal provision, uses the words, do you have good and sufficient cause? Good and sufficient, even a more stringent test. So remember, when you look at sufficiency, don't treat it laxly. The point is that yes, by and large, judicial authorities are liberal. They permit submission of evidence. Even at the tribunal, they say that this is the last fact finding body. It is permitted, but don't be under the presumption that it always will, because as I said, the test of sufficiency is a far more stringent test than reasonableness. So that's what is important. I think unless people have questions or whatever, they can take it further. So this is what I wanted to say.
Right, Sagar sir. Now I think if anyone has questions or queries about what we did last time, otherwise I think we will move to our item number 5 of today. I only wanted to point out about what sir said, just elaborating it. There's this judgment in the case of, we had seen it last time, Avan Gidwani versus Assistant Commissioner of Income Tax. It's a Mumbai tribunal judgment. So in that judgment, there is a reference to a phrase. That phrase is important, and I'll just read that phrase out. What it says is, from the facts narrated above, we notice that the assessee could collect various evidences only after passing of the assessment order. See, what had happened in this case was, in this case of Aman Gidwani, there was some foreign bank account which they had traced, and there were some queries pertaining to that. But the assessee was not confronted with the copy of that bank account, whatever they were referring to, in which he also was a signatory. And so, once the assessment order was framed, that paper was released to him. So it became available to the assessee first time after the assessment order. So he has made a detailed compilation explaining each and every entry in that bank account, and he has furnished it. So what the tribunal has held here is that we notice that the assessee could collect various evidences only after passing of the assessment order. According to the assessee, these additional evidences are vital documents which are required to be considered in order to adjudicate the issue in a judicious manner. The principle of body alterum partem, that is, no man should be condemned unheard, is the basic canon principles of natural justice, and accordingly we find merit in the contentions of the assessee that Rule 46A of the income tax rules cannot override the principles of natural justice. Hence, we are of the view that the learned CIT was not justified in refusing to admit the various additional evidences furnished by the assessee. Since the assessee was not given opportunity to contradict the findings given by the AO and not admitting the additional evidences, we are of the view that the learned CIT appeal should re-adjudicate all the issues afresh by admitting the additional evidences. Accordingly, we set aside the order, etc. So basically, this particular judgment is very relevant. We don't know whether it was agitated in a higher level or it ended with the tribunal, but in the literature which we tried to research, the tribunal judgment is the last one, but it enunciates a very important concept that Rule 46A cannot override the principles of natural justice. So if there is any evidence which is essential or crucial, or as it says, it goes to the crux or the very root of the matter, which will decide whether a particular amount is assessable as income or not, or which the assessee needs to use to controvert to the findings of the AO, then those will have to be entertained by the tax authorities or the appellate authorities. That is what this judgment says. And to that extent, this is one solution, because this Deepak Gadgil had said, how can one overcome the rigors of 46A? So this is one way in which rigors of 46A can be overcome. That is by adducing to or by showing that the matter, although not produced before assessing officer, goes to the very root or is very critical of actually assessing the particular income. Another example could be that audit has not been completed at that point of time. So you do not have audited accounts and the assessing officer may have estimated it. But subsequently, statutory audit could have got completed after the assessment has been framed also. In which case, again, that audit report itself, which is issued by a third party, there is an auditor who is independent of the assessee, can become an evidence. So this is another example which comes to my mind. Or it could be documents or papers which are seized, which are subsequently released and made available to the, or the assessee is allowed to make copies for the purposes of making his submissions. Now I think we go to document number 5, Sagar sir, that is appellant is entitled to produce additional evidences under 46A.
Yes.
This is decoded rule 46A by that Amresh Vashisht. Now, in that, I want you to go to page 2, sir. Rule 46A to be fully and strictly complied. So, no, this is very important and significant. The below, that 2 part, because what it says is a distinction should be recognized and maintained between a case where the assessee invokes Rule 46A to adduce additional evidence before the CIT appeals, and a case where CIT appeals without being prompted by the assessee while dealing with the appeal considers it fit to cause or make a further inquiry by virtue of the powers vested in him under subsection 4 of section 250. It is only when he exercises his statutory suo motu powers under the above subsection that the requirements of Rule 46A need not be followed. On the other hand, whenever the assessee who is in appeal before him invokes Rule 46A, it is incumbent upon the CIT appeals to comply with the requirements of the rule strictly. In fact, what it means is that this particular section, I was just reading the commentary, this particular rule was introduced by the CBDT in order to rein in the unfettered powers of the CIT appeals. Although those powers still exist under 250 into bracket 4, but these should not be read as unlimited in the context where an assessee volunteers a particular evidence or comes forward with a particular evidence. Now, so therefore, what it says is that on receiving an application with additional evidences, CIT appeals is not free to act on his choice. His actions are well defined in the law and in the various judicious pronouncements. If the additional evidences are crucial and its consideration and appraisal would render the substantial justice to the appellant, the same deserve to be addressed. The Honorable Delhi High Court's judgment in the case of CIT versus Virgin Securities and Credits, wherein the Honorable Court held that the CIT appeal should admit the additional evidence if he finds the same is crucial for the disposal of the appeal. And similarly, in the case of Chandrakant Chanu Bhai Patel, also wherein it has been held that if additional evidence is without any blemish and in order to advance the cause of justice, the same ought to be admitted. So these two are something similar to what we saw of Avan, that earlier judgment, Avan Gedwani. So that was a tribunal judgment. These are Delhi High Court judgments. Now, again, there are 3 more judgments on the next page, which we can discuss if you feel, but they are identical. We talk of CIT appeals can admit additional evidence or documents only after applying Rule 46A, which would mean that he has to satisfy himself it falls in any of those 4 sub-clauses. And if he is so satisfied, he has to send it for getting a remand report. That is the getting the inputs of the assessing officer and giving him an opportunity in writing before that evidence would be accepted. Then even if the assessing officer says, do not accept this evidence or this evidence is not substantiated, etc., CIT appeals can arrive at his own views. Now let us look at B part, which is below, sir. Sagar sir, B part. Yeah, powers of CIT appeal to admit additional evidence under 250 into bracket 4, Rule 46A, and requirements to give AO an opportunity. The additional evidence should be admitted in case the assessee was prevented by sufficient cause. That is seen. The observation of the CIT appeals also take care of Subrule 2, under which he is required to record his reasons for admitting the additional evidence. Thus, the requirements of 1 and 2 shall be complied with. So, this Manish Bildwell case judgment is given. The Subrule 3, that is, where any evidence is produced for the first time, he has to give an opportunity. If that is not complied with, so in this case, it was not complied with, then in that case, the CIT appeals order was thrown out. Now, so the C part, which is at the bottom of the same page, deals with the same thing. So does the subsequent. So all these judgments are the same. You come to E part, sir. E. C, D are both the same. E. To render justice, CIT appeals can admit new evidence. So here again, it talks of new evidence, but he has to consider or send back for a remand report. In fact, if one were to look at the scheme of things, the CIT appeals is allowed to entertain additional grounds of appeal also. My point is this: if it's a completely new or an additional ground of appeal, obviously the evidence pertaining to that may not have been submitted or furnished before the assessing officer. So if he accepts that additional argument or a fresh argument, then he is entitled to admit that evidence, provided of course he goes back and gets a remand report from the assessing officer in respect of that. So additional evidence must be allowed for a reasonable cause and then cannot override the principles of natural justice. So both those judgments are already covered. Now I want you to come to J, sir, because that J is very significant in terms of procedure. It's on page 9 out of 11. J, it's gone up. Sorry. I'll just read it quickly. J, no contravention of Rule 46A if CIT appeal sends documents submitted by assessee for remand report. So this is ITAT Delhi Bhavya Lakhani Traders and Suppliers Private Limited. There is no cogency in the ground raised by the revenue that learned commissioner has not duly afforded adequate opportunity to the AO to consider the submissions and evidences filed before him at the appellate stage. The learned CIT appeals duly sent the documents furnished by the assessee at the appellate stage to the AO for a remand report. That's what I mentioned as the standard procedure. Under the circumstances, there cannot be any issue that AO was not provided adequate opportunity in this regard. Learned departmental representative in this regard fairly agreed that the contravention of Rule 46A does not arise in this case, as the AO has been provided with adequate opportunity and the remand report obtained from him. In this view of the matter, we do not find any infirmity in the order of the learned CIT appeals. Accordingly, we uphold the same. Now, ITAT restores matter to AO for consideration of additional evidence. Now, in this case, remand report was not called for, and so therefore, it is necessary. I mean, the ITAT has set it aside. Admitting additional evidence without calling for remand report violates Rule 46A. That is at the bottom of the page. Sagar sir, L. Item L. Just below that. It goes to the next page. ITAT Delhi versus late Avatar Singh Bahal. So if remand report is not called for, it violates the principle, because just like assessee has to be given the opportunity, AO also needs to be given the opportunity, and proper reasons must be given for non-acceptance of additional evidence. So this again goes back to the first case which we discussed, that principle of audi alteram partem. That is, no man can be sort of adjudicated upon without being heard. In fact, I point out to the Supreme Court observation. Go to the bottom of that page, sir. M. Sagar, sir. The Honorable Supreme Court in the case of Collector Land Katji 167 ITR 471 page, Supreme Court have held that when technical considerations are pitted against the cause of substantial justice, it is the cause of substantial justice that must prevail. Means additional evidence be admitted at any stage of proceedings with a motive to provide justice. So this actually is something which, I mean, if one were to look at it this way, then probably everything under the sun could be considered as admissible, only provided it advances the cause of justice. So if it is really clinching evidence which you are producing, you can produce it at any stage of the proceedings, because until proved guilty, that is the principle of criminal law, of course, not of civil law, because income tax is a civil law, I guess. So that principle is that no person is guilty until proven so. So therefore, one has to be given the opportunity till the very end. So this particular file, or that fifth document which we looked at, essentially deals with all the corners of the various nuances of section 46, I mean rule 46A. That is, what are its limits, when can it be invoked, and what is the procedure to be followed so that it the evidence produced by the appellant gets admitted. I think we are on, what is the time? 44. So we have another 15 minutes.
Yeah, we do have time, but I was just wondering, in the meantime, just like one of the members asked the question.
Yes, I think now we should look at questions and look
questions
at
or
answers from the audience.
contributions.
Correct, absolutely.
They may also have some different.
No, because there was a long gap. First of all, I must apologize, because we did our first lecture on the 1st of April. So one full month and another 15 days. So a lot of time went in recap, and my apologies for that. But somehow or the other, time could not be found for this. So we shouldn't allow this to happen the next time.
Vishnu.
Bola. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask that in connection with the remand report, which is received from the assessing officer, is there any departmental instruction that the remand report has necessarily to be routed through the joint or the additional commissioner? Because in one
procedure,
because in one particular case, I came across that unfortunately that particular remand report was forwarded directly by the assessing officer, and CIT appeal said that I cannot accept it. It has to go back to him, and it has to be routed through the jurisdictional joint commissioner or additional commissioner. So that is just a point why, because if, as we always say, that if we are on slippery ground, sometimes this kind of things can help.
Yes, they can and do backfire. In fact, I have had an experience where a particular remand report was finalized, and proceedings in that remand where order sheet was duly signed by me. The remand, the report was actually dictated in front of me by the AO, and later on, to my surprise, again a fresh notice was received in connection with the same thing. When I went for the hearing, I was told that such a report does not exist, and so therefore a fresh report has to be made. Well, again we submitted everything. Of course, I pointed out to the order sheet noting, but well, then they said there is no such report on file. So things which, sometimes very strange things do happen in connection with this. But in my experience, always it goes through the, although I'm not aware of any such administrative instructions in writing, but it always goes through additional or joint commissioner. With their knowledge or with their approval or concurrence, that the remand report is sent. I think Sagar sir, there is also one more point raised by one of them, that what are the situations in which it would be considered that it is an elaboration of an existing, or a clarification of an existing point which has, or evidence which has already been furnished in the course of assessment proceedings. So an example which I just thought of and came to my mind was that if there is a matter of turnover and you have furnished your profit and loss account, and the issue is of estimation of turnover because books of accounts were not complete, or audit was not carried out, or there is some infirmity in the books, then for example, the order of the sales tax department mentioning a particular turnover, if you furnish that order, so that order may not be available at the time of assessment proceeding. If you furnish it in appellate proceedings, then that can be regarded as evidence which is in elaboration of something which is already there. So it's just embellishing or supporting evidence which you have already furnished. It is not any fresh evidence. It is just something which is, already on the file of the AO, the turnover. You are just clarifying it. It's a clarificatory evidence which you are giving, not fresh evidence. Any other points in that chat? I think there were 2-3 points raised by Prasad sir.
So, any additional contributions to the same point? Sir, is there any time limit for receiving the remand report from assessing officer? Because many times they send it for
90 days. I recollect faintly something like 90 days, but I'm not sure. I mean, what I realize is this particular small topic has made me realize that we have to brush up our knowledge of administrative provisions under Income Tax Act. Hi, Pramod. I remember earlier I've gone through 4 volumes. I had some friends in that directorate on the 4th floor. Now, of course, ICAR on 4th floor is all assessing officers. Of course, there would be those e-assessment officers there. But there was one administrative directorate which used to bring out publications for income tax officers. Since I used to sometimes take lectures in that Mahalakshmi as well as Bandra office, so I had access to those volumes. Those volumes contain all the administrative provisions and how assessment is to be carried out. Instruction booklets. They were very useful.
The reason why I asked this question was because many times we are interested in getting the results from either CIT or tribunal, so that the interest liability should not mount in case the decision is against us. They send it to the remand, and that assessing officer, because of already he is overburdened or something, and he doesn't send a remand report. We keep on asking you. He says, okay, we'll send. I have sent. And because I don't think they definitely don't send within 90 days or something, and sometimes it takes more time also, and then we have to actually plead the assessing officer stating that अरे बाबा भेजो जो भी है तुम्हारा reason जो है वो भेजो, so that we can actually
very true
proceed. So that is why I asked this question.
No, all reports are a challenge. For example, whenever we apply for a waiver of interest to the CIT, there also experiences that the assessing officer's report is the bottleneck point. So that report takes too long a time to reach.
No, in fact, and if their colleagues is going to run into a problem, because I have at least 4 cases where we have challenged a reassessment on the ground of 143(2) issue not being issued. Now, for that, actually no remand should be there required, or no time should be required. So, because either the 143(2) is issued or it is not issued, either way.
Correct.
But they have not, in my one particular case, they have not replied for 3 years, saying that 143(2) because, and the officer told me that we don't want to respond, because if we respond, the person who has not issued this notice, he is close to retirement. He will come into a problem.
Sir, in fact, very good you brought up that point. I have a case law which I have taken out. This is DCIT versus Ashok Walia, ITIT Calcutta. It's very important. It says document which is already on file of AO cannot be treated as additional evidence. So what happened here was, by way of this appeal, the AO has called into correctness of learned CIT order dated 11th May in the matter of assessment under 143.3. Grievance is raised by the AO are as follows: that on the circumstances of the case, the learned CIT officer ordered in law by directing the AO to verify whether the assessee furnished his original return of income within due date under 139(1) or not, it tantamounts to setting aside of his proceedings. And that on the circumstances of the case, the learned CIT appeals has ordered in fact and law by admitting acknowledgement of return dated 31st July 2008 of the assessee in violation of the provisions of Rule 46A of the IT rules. So the tribunal held that, look, this acknowledgement, this return is actually filed before you. So admitting that acknowledgement cannot be considered as additional evidence. So the AO has tried to argue that accepting the acknowledgement of the date of filing the return as having been within time is an additional evidence accepted by the CIT appeal. So, I mean, the point which you mentioned of trying to cover up or protect, yes, it can go to any length as much as of filing an appeal against the CIT appeals order by the ITO. So,
And as simple as that. In fact, as I said, in one particular case, we have taken a ground and we have steadfastly refrained from deleting that ground. The ground is simple, is that there was a writ petition filed, and the High Court had stayed the proceedings. Now the principle is that, or the law is that, if that stay is vacated, then within a particular time frame the assessment has to be completed. Now what actually happened was that the AO forgot to make that assessment, and that it got barred by limitation. So what he did was, he actually framed the assessment in December, but then after having framed the assessment in December, he called the person concerned from the SSE and said, you give me an acknowledgement of that times where there were not uploading the orders. So
yes,
said,
yes,
you give me an acknowledgement in October. So the SSE, they asked me what we should do, because I was not their chartered accountant, but I said, no, you don't give an acknowledgement. So they did not give an acknowledgement. So finally what he did was, he passed the order in December, but he dated it just before the last day on which the limitation ended.
Okay.
So fine, we took a stand that this is time barred. So they said, how will you establish that it is time barred? Because it has to be completed only by that time of limitation. I said, that is correct. But the point is, they did not know this, that I had with me at which point of time it had been posted. Because in postal, you get a tracking record. So it had been put into speed post on the 24th of December. And he was saying it was completed on 24th October. So I said, fine, you have put it in post on December. So the principle of the order has to be issued at a particular point of time. So when you issue that order, it has to go out of your control. So you tell me how you completed an order in 24th October and you did not find time to post it for 2 months, 24th December. So the CIT appeals tried to persuade me that, Mr. Sate, you withdraw this ground. We'll decide on merits. I said, no, I have instructions not to withdraw this ground. So you adjudicate. So he sent for a report. There's no question of a report, because it obviously. Then see the audacity of the department. The department says that no. I said, they said, suppose we say that we have passed it on 24th October. What is your next course of action? I said, tell you what my next course of action. I'm going to ask you that obviously the officer would have had large number of cases. How many cases he completed in October and did not post the orders? You give me that evidence. There has to be a register, na? Because then when it is posted, it is given for posting. So that register will be there. Then they said, see the audacity. They said, suppose we say that register is lost. I said, very good. You say that register is lost, in which case I'll file an RTI application. Then let the commissioner come on record and say that he has lost that register. Then we'll go to the tribunal or the High Court, and then if they call for a personal presence of your commissioner, then don't tell me, because that is what I'm going to tell counsel. They were so afraid. I said, let's admit a fact that this is beyond limitation. It is beyond limitation. It is beyond limitation. That's it.
Correct.
So accept that it is beyond limitation. I said, look, take assessment. If it is set aside on limitation, department is not going to lose tons of money. You will have so many other cases.
Yes.
Can't hide. And I'm saying this with some degree of that this is the same thing that is happening with this government today. If you fail to admit reality, now that's a problem. That is what's happening. Anyway.
So, sir, actually, we are running out of time.
Yeah.
We were actually planning to discuss 1 or 2 points which might become of some interest to all of us and can be studied by the people of the member. So if you can quickly say one or two points on which you may be interested in listening or facilitating, then people will start studying, and some of the people can come forward and they can be the group leader or the facilitator on that topic, one small topic or maybe something
Sagar sir,
very
can I
briefly.
one question? Sagar sir,
Yeah, yeah.
Vishnu sir, I have
Ah.
only one question. 148,
Yeah.
slightly to differ these points.
Ah.
Budget 2021, 148 has been done by the only 3 years, subject to
Ah.
50 lakhs.
Ah.
Now, 27 March 2021, the president assents to the budget and the act has been passed.
Mm.
April 21, the government and issue a circular
Mm.
to the power extend the another 3 months. So
Yes.
my question is that this circular
So
can
the old
override
provisions apply. See, in effect, the meaning of that circular is, and in fact, we have also, my assessees have also received number of notices under 148 under the old procedure still, because that has been extended. Now, whether it is justified or not, or when the assent was given, how the old provision is still applying, that is what you want to try to
my
say.
question. That is
So
exactly
one
my
can,
question.
one can make a test case out of it, provided one has the resources and the time and the energy, and the courts are able to take it up for hearing as something which is urgent and critical, because currently only urgent and critical things are being taken up. See, Supreme Court has again extended period of limitation. So if you look at it in that context, the extension of limitation by the government cannot that way be challenged. That is my feeling of it. I mean,
But
at
sir,
the one side, you say that because of Supreme Court judgment, our dates of compliance are also extended. If that is what we are trying to take a shelter at, then lockdown applies to them also equally, because they are also working only 15% of the staff. Then most of them going, not going, they are not allowed to call any, no outside party is allowed to get into. I mean, income tax office, no one can enter. That is how it is. Only AOs can enter, or the staff on duty. Given that, one has to look at reasonableness. I mean, it should cut from both sides. So, I mean, of course, it could have been, the new procedure could have been made applicable. I don't think whether you give it 3 months time or apply the new procedure straight away, it should not make a difference. But that's how the government wants to do. They want to have the cake and eat it all. So that's a bit always like that with the department.
but Vishnu sir,
हाँ.
जो कोर्ट सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने अनदर लिमिटेशन एक्ट दिया है, क्या उसमें क्वाशी जुडिकेशन 148 आपको भी एप्लीकेबल होगा? I think it is applicable to only the High Court and Supreme Court and lower court.
Very true. It's applicable only to appellate authorities and court procedures. But ultimately, one has to look at it in that spirit. That yes,
Actually,
people are unable to carry out things.
Actually, let me just interject for a minute, because it's
yes,
like
sir.
this, that 148 is a process. One issue of 148 is culmination of a process. What is the process? The process is that the assessing officer either comes in possession of certain information, or there is something which he leads him to believe that income has escaped assessment. So
he has to record his satisfaction.
Therefore, there is a time lag. There is a time lag between formation of that belief and recording the reasons, and the third stage is issue of an order, issue of a notice.
After
Now,
approval.
after approval. Now, if the department takes a stand, and they are entitled to take such a stand, is that yes, in this process, the process has been delayed on account of the pandemic. I have formed my belief, but I have not got adequate time to record, nor I have got adequate time to seek sanction, and therefore the extended period is only for that purpose. So I don't think that a challenge on the basis that the law got amended will stand judicial scrutiny. I don't think so, because of this process. Of course, tomorrow they have extended to 30th June. If you extend it for a year or so, then yes, possibly courts will look at it differently. But ultimately, if they are able to establish that the extension is to take care of this interregnum between the process, I think it's a fair case.
So again, human probability.
Sir, I have to tell you one last question. If you have to taking about the department has rightly to issue a notice 148, But sir, I am only one question. The budget 2021, all the provisions are applicable to 1/4/2021. After the president appraisal of 27 March 2021. Then this section is also been applicable for 1st April 2021.
The point is that they are extending the old law for a limited period of a difficulty arising on account of administering the
Agreed,
old
but
law.
then I have now another point which sprung into my mind.
Yeah.
That if they say okay, because of this we are extending this administrative portion of the law, then why not extend application of the entire law? Assessees are also facing difficulty complying with the new law.
Correct, sir.
That is a
So-
different matter altogether. I agree
so
with
maybe
you.
one can go with that plea that look, they have extended that, so extend everything.
So fine. I would concur with that rather than arguing the other side, saying that no, because the law changed.
Because normally, I mean, why probably he's feeling bad and everyone feels bad is because wherever it's a question of compliance or obligation by a department, then the government is very quick at granting extension, of time quietly, even without any demand being made by the
But-
administrative machinery. But when it comes to assessees compliance, they are always very stingy about such extensions. So
it is
they are
always
not
going.
seen to be liberal on both sides of
No,
the
that I
table.
agree with. That I agree with.
So
That I agree with. But then that this has been the situation for 70 years, so it's not going to change very easily. So ultimately, there is virtually no change in the bureaucratic attitude over 70 years. I don't see much of a change, despite the change of a ruling dispensation.
I see we are in a close group, so I can be permitted to say that Parimal, the answer to your question is कि often people in the bureaucracy are like आता त्याचं इंग्लिश मध्ये ट्रान्सलेशन करणं कठीण आहे, झारीतले शुक्राचार्य असतात ते. So if any relief is also given by the government, they get very agitated that, oh, why is the assessee already he is getting so much benefit, why is he getting one more benefit? So always त्यांच्या पोटात दुखतं ते.
No, in
कुठला
fact,
relief मिळत असेल
you
तर.
are absolutely
I think
right.
this matter will be settled in the High Court or Supreme Court, because so many times the issue of notice, so many others SSC has to be also challenged.
So that's what the Kanere sir said. Now, if you have the wherewithal, then of course. But even at the Supreme Court, I don't know. Matlab, quite a few decisions were not so. But these are incongruencies bound to be there in a. But yes, you are absolutely right, because I always often give the solution or give the illustration of that in that leave travel allowance. Initially, you had airfare was not covered, only second class AC fare was covered. And then at one point of time, they said that no, we will cover airfare also. And then I asked a person, why you have changed it now? He said, now officers also can get. That is why we have changed.
That is why we have changed it. So that's true. That's very true. In fact, I remember one judgment, one argument by this Nani Palkewala. That was for the Tata Group. I remember having read the judgment somewhere. It was about concessional interest, taxing of concessional interest as a perquisite in the hands of employee. So what he had argued was that my employee would never borrow monies if it is at the market rate. So only because it is being given at 3%, he is able to borrow. And I am interested in him buying a house so that my company accommodation will become free for other people who are waiting in queue, and I can accommodate more people. So therefore, this is not a concessional rate this is not a perquisite for him. Anything more than that, he cannot afford. And actually, the judgment went in his favor. Then that amendment was done to
Yes.
Rule 14, and they brought in that above a certain percentage, it is taxable, deemed perquisite. So before that, they had tried to tax it generally, and he had argued very brilliantly that it's actually not a perquisite. Because it is at such a rate, only therefore he is able to afford. Otherwise, how can you expect a worker to borrow monies at 12% or 9% and buy a house. It's not just possible. So, and he had given instances of what are the rates of interest charged on housing overseas and elsewhere. So I remember that judgment very much. I mean, the argument and the judgment. Okay, so Sagar sir, those points which you mentioned, I mean,
So,
possible topics.
sir, yeah, if you can be little one-liners or two-liners,
One liner.
it will be
See,
good.
one was what I thought was in house property, basically this income which one receives from letting out properties or other complex, properties. So either it could be income from house property, it could be business income. There are various judgments to that effect. There's Shambhu Investments, which says it's house property. Then there is that national, I think, cold storage, which says that it is business income. And in certain situations, for example, where the property is not owned, it could be other sources also. So this is one example which I thought that, okay, this same receipt, basically the receipt is for letting out something, and it is getting taxed as house property, getting taxed as business, and getting taxed as other sources. That could be one topic. A related topic could be, rent received after the tenant has been given issued eviction notice. So mesne profits, which are not liable to tax, versus rent, which is liable to tax. That could be a subtopic of this. And the second thing which I thought was tax management, tax planning, tax avoidance, and this general GAAR, because we expect next time tax audit GAAR will be on the tax audit report. It has been extended and not made applicable far too many times. So GAAR is something, and of course along with that,
Sagar, if you want to consider, let somebody consider pure section 6, nothing else, test of residence, because you will find that after the two amendments by Finance Act 20 and 21, the test of residence also has undergone
yes,
a fair amount of change.
yes.
So that will also be an interesting topic. Section 6 simpliciter, only section 6. That in itself will have a lot of implications.
Yes, surely.
Yeah, and we can trace the history also. Like earlier, it was, uh, 9 out of 10 years he
Yes,
has to
yes.
be a resident. Now it is 9 out of 10 years he has to be a non-resident. So it is
Also,
completely overturned.
also the question of foreign income, Indian income, 15 lakhs. So many changes have come
Yeah,
in
and
the
if he is
recent.
non-resident, if he is not a resident of any country,
So that test
then he's
also,
deemed to be a resident of India. If he
and
is a
also
citizen, all that.
what is liable to tax, what is not liable, if people are interested. Otherwise, I think you have asked Pramod to take 9B and 45(4) in any case. That is already there. So
Okay.
And this residence aspect is also, I think,
Great session, sir. Great session.
yeah. So Deepak Tikekar also was talking to me that so many people have come to India, and because of the lockdown, they are
That
unable to move out.
transitional provision, whatever.
Yeah. So
relief.
last year they had given some relief, but this year they have not given the relief, and many
As of now,
non-residents.
no relief.
So many non-residents are working from India. So whether that number of, whether that income is actually accruing in India or not is also will be tested, because whether it is working when they are working from India, can you say that income is accruing in India or not, and whether we can set aside that number of days test, even if that person is resident.
in the context of old ATO.
Yeah.
No, now especially one can say that, a foreign, an employee of a foreign company, when you technically say that he's working from home, he may have to work from India because he has come back home to work. I'm on the, I would say, this is of course on the lighter side, but yes, technically he could be working from home and working abroad.
Okay. So there are good number of topics that we have. So I will send in the group also whether anybody is interested in facilitating the discussion, because it may be difficult for the same persons to work on the topics again and again. And Deepak ji and Vishnu ji and Anil ji have also promised that if somebody wants to prepare for those topics, they can provide lot of masala and guide that person. so that the topic and the presentation or the discussion becomes pretty interesting. So please contact me once you are finding it these topics very interesting, because the moment you decide to present, then you will also make some kind of studies, and that will enhance your knowledge. So please try to do that. There is a special thanks to CA Vishnu Kaneri today, because he was actually visiting clinics, and he has some eye problems. Today also he had been to clinic, and some medicine was put in his eyes, and in spite of this, he has been able to
No,
read.
nothing very complicated. Only pupils dilated, so you cannot
So-
read actually.
So that's the main thing, sir. So in spite of that, you have been present. and,
Memory comes in handy, and
Yes,
I had
yes.
taken some notes in very big bold handwriting.
So that's good of you, and very nice gesture, and that shows your integrity towards the profession as well as the subject.
He's Sagar is so powerful. His name is Vishnu, so
That's God's grace. Hello.
Sir, and all those participants, 25 or 30, roughly we had 29 to 30 participants at some point of time at 11 o'clock or 11:15 in the night. They are studying and coming together. And I would say that mainly this is because of the contributions of the luminaries like what you all have. Although there are some others who are not speaking, but they are also knowledgeable. So I would request them to actually come forward and also take part in the discussion. That will become kind of a variety of speakers and different type of knowledge. So with this, I would like to end today's meeting. Thanks a lot, sir. And as usual, our recordings will be shared on the YouTube in due course of time, maybe 3 to 4 days time. Thanks
Right,
a
sir.
lot,
Thank
sir.
you. Thank you so much.
Thank
sir.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you all of you for a
Thank
patient
you.
hearing. Huh?
You guys
Thank you, sir. Stay safe,
Yeah.
stay home.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye.
have-